This is the Blood Red podcast from the Liverpool Echo.
Hello and welcome back to the Blood Red podcast from the Liverpool Echo. I'm your host, Matt Addison, with our Liverpool correspondent, Paul Gorst, and also our sports social media editor, Kai Delaney, alongside me to talk through all of the latest Liverpool topics and bring you some really interesting themes to get into this afternoon. We're going to begin with a look at the situation at Newcastle United after their takeover went through last week. I know that Guy Clark and I think Dan Kay and Theo Squires spoke a little bit about that on Friday's edition of the podcast, but since then there have been a few more developments and things to get into too. But I suppose first and foremost, I should give you both the opportunity to give us a bit of a general thoughts on the Newcastle takeover, Gorsty. I think there's probably two sides of it that we have to touch upon. One is the sort of sports washing element. The other is the fact that they are very, very rich and could soon become a contender at the top of the Premier League table. What have you sort of made of the takeover? How big a worry should it be for Liverpool moving forward?
To answer the second part of your question, Matt, I don't think Liverpool fans need to be concerned at all. Certainly not for the next 3 or 4 years. Newcastle aren't going to... I mean, let's face it, they're in the relegation zone at the moment, aren't they? They're not going to be... they're not going to become Manchester City in the blink of an eye. It's going to take several really good transfer windows for that to happen, for them to build up, you know, the kind of level that they want to be at. And I'm not sure it's possible anymore, to be honest, with financial fair play and so on. I don't think that was quite as prevalent as when City was spending all their money towards the turn of the decade and a little bit further into it. And it certainly wasn't as prevalent when Chelsea came in with Roman Abramovich. So I think it's a little bit more difficult for teams to be able to do that, you know, with a magic wand and in the space of one transfer window. So there's absolutely no concerns, or there shouldn't be any concerns to Liverpool fans anytime soon. You know, as I say, City came in, City's owners 2008. I think they won the FA Cup in 2011 and then won the Premier League in 2012. So it took them a good few years to become serious contenders. And this is a squad that was far better than Newcastle's is at the moment. If Newcastle have a poor January transfer window, they could be right up against it for the season, to be honest. The squad isn't great as it is, and you know, having an ownership group that's worth 230 billion or whatever the stupid figure is, that's not going to change anything overnight. It will take time. So Liverpool fans shouldn't, you know, wouldn't blink twice at Newcastle. You know, no matter how much money they've got, certainly not for a good few years. To answer the first part of your question, it's I'm staggered that it's been allowed to go through. I know Amanda Staveley has said that the Public Investment Fund is not, you know, directly linked to Saudi Arabia's monarchy and whatever else, but I don't think anyone seriously believes that, and the Premier League are claiming that they've had legally binding assurances and whatever else, but let's face it, money talks, doesn't it? Money talks in this country, whether it's football, sport, any kind of sector. This country seems very willing to acquiesce to the highest bidders, and it looks like that's what's happened here. So, should it be happening? Probably not, but we are where we are.
Yeah, plenty of sort of questions around it, Kai, in that regard. I mean, I said to you this morning, I think it might take sort of 8 to 10 years for Liverpool fans to have to be concerned. Do you think that's a sort of realistic timescale? As Gorsty said, they're right at the bottom now. It's not really a quick fix, and it's not really the same as a Chelsea or a Manchester City in the past.
No, it's not. And I think, you know, one thing that's not been mentioned at all is actually, I think you brought it up this morning. We were having a chat that there's still the possibility that if they don't get their January transfer window, right, they could end up getting relegated. And with all these new owners, and, you know, what would they make of that? Losing their Premier League revenue and everything that comes with being in that competition. But yeah, I think that they've got a long way to go. Everyone obviously looks at City as the kind of obvious template there, going from having no money to all the riches in the world. But it was a long process for City to get where they are now. You know, that they had that initial phase of signing players like Craig Bellamy, you know, Benjani, Rocky Cruz, who were some of the brightest prospects in the league, but they were really just taking the best players from those around them and making themselves the best for the rest, getting into the kind of, can we get into the top 4 conversation. So they've got a long road ahead of them, and certainly before they're worrying the likes of Man United, Man City, Liverpool, and so on, they've got to get themselves clear of the rest of the pack.
Yeah, certainly a long journey ahead for Newcastle and their new owners and their fans. But it's not just the transfers and the money that we're going to be speaking about. It's obviously the links to Steven Gerrard as well, Gorsty. He's reportedly one of the favourites, if not the favourite, to move there from Rangers. It does make a little bit of sense to me. Is that one that you can see happening, do you think, in the future?
I haven't spoken to anyone around Gerrard's camp about this, but it's something that seems to just have a little bit of realism attached to it, if that makes sense. It seems to be obviously Newcastle looking to build, and Gerrard, I'm sure, has got designs on managing in England at some point. Amanda Staley said on Friday, didn't she? She was asked about Steve Bruce's future, and rather than just say, "Oh well, he's the manager and whatever else," and that will be the case, it was almost we haven't had a chance to give that a thought. So you'd imagine that doesn't orbit too well for Bruce's future. You imagine that once they sit down and they think about what they want to do, the new, more high-profile manager might be on the agenda. And despite his kind of, he's still in the fledgling years of his career, Gerrard is a high-profile manager, isn't he? What he's achieved at Rangers in such a short space of time is nothing short of remarkable, really. And there will be plenty who are keeping tabs on him, and the case would be for him is whether he wants to move to England now or he wants to continue with the project that he's got at Rangers. I imagine his standard in the game right now as a football manager, he'll be able to have his pick of several options. So if something like Newcastle did come up, I guess the ball would be in his court to give it a thought. I think Kenny Dalglish said across the weekend that Gerrard wouldn't be thinking anywhere close to managing Newcastle at the moment, and that's probably true, isn't he? He'll say that he's focused on Rangers and so on. But if Newcastle did kind of make an advance, and I'd imagine it'd be something he'd certainly think long and hard about.
Yeah, it's a big club, a big fan base, a step up from Scottish football, and it also wouldn't be competing directly with Liverpool immediately. It does seem to tick quite a lot of boxes, Kai.
Yeah, you can certainly make a case and see it happening, and you can see why Gerrard might be tempted if the offer is on the table. As you say, it's certainly a step up going from the SPL and to one of, they have been the most successful team in England, but they're certainly one of the biggest in terms of profile and the fan base, and very similar to Liverpool, I think, in the way that the city is really, lives and breathes football, and famous for that kind of goldfish bowl element, which has sometimes been used in a negative context, and managers and players have struggled with that, and there's kind of nothing other than football in the city. But I think, Gerrard having been at Liverpool all his life and then similar at Rangers now, I think he'd be completely used to that at Newcastle, and clearly, he thrives in that kind of environment. And if he's given the opportunity to take Newcastle to that next step, and the old phrase is a war chest, isn't it? If he's been getting 150, 200 million to spend and really implement his own style and build his own team there, it could be for the next several years at Newcastle, if he could make a bit of a legacy there and take them on that next step towards being, where they want to be, then that would certainly put him in good stead when the opportunity comes up at Liverpool, because some of the accusations that were maybe put to Lampard about why he failed at Chelsea was it was too early. He didn't have any Premier League experience, obviously going straight in from Derby. So maybe for Gerrard to get that Premier League job and have a few years with his own team at a bit of a higher level could be just what he needs.
Yeah, I think it's sort of been difficult, hasn't it, Gorsty, in terms of thinking Rangers to Liverpool would be a big step, but who would be that club in the middle? I can't necessarily see him going abroad and doing that. You think of a team maybe like an Everton, he's not going to go there. Aston Villa are quite settled with their own manager. They don't need somebody. Leeds United are the same. Newcastle, though, could be a bit of an opportunity where you think that it's the right level of club. There's lots of similarities between Rangers and Liverpool. It does make logical sense in certain ways.
Yeah, very much so. As I say, though, I mean, it depends how much thought Gerrard is currently given to his long-term career prospects. He obviously will have designs on eventually managing in the Premier League, and I'm pretty sure that will be with Liverpool one day. But will he be thinking about it now? Does he still have things he wants to achieve at Ibrox? And you could argue maybe not. He's managed to kind of dislodge Celtic and end the kind of 10 in a row, and he's going to be a legend forever for what he's already done up there. But I suppose only him and his kind of inner circle will know what his ambitions are at the moment.
What do you think is the kind of ceiling for Newcastle, Kai? If Gerrard was to go there, is that something that he could take them to the next level? Do you think how quickly would that have to happen for that to be the perfect next step?
It's an interesting time to take the role, isn't it? Because as Gorst was saying, they're going to be looking for a name. Would they be taking the Rangers manager if he wasn't Steven Gerrard? Probably not. He has been successful there, and he did end the 10-year domination of Celtic. But he's as much a brand worldwide and a global name as he is a successful manager in his short time in the game so far as manager. But I likened it to the Man City situation earlier, and you'd have to say it would be maybe the Mark Hughes role. It's the first time they're giving you all the money to spend, and it's not going to be one manager in Newcastle that takes them from where they are now to Premier League champions. If that's the case, they're going to have a few sort of stepping stones, and it may be that they could both use each other as a stepping stone. Gerrard could use Newcastle as that pathway towards eventually Liverpool and bigger and better things for his own career, and Newcastle could perhaps use Gerrard as a stepping stone to get into perhaps European football, possibly Champions League, if an absolute dreamland. And then if Gerrard leaves when the time comes, they'll be in a better position to go out and get a bigger name, maybe Antonio Conte or someone that's been around and has European pedigree.
Lots of players already inevitably being linked with a move to Newcastle. Gorsty, Felipe Coutinho is one of those. Lots of reports, as I say, inevitably around players like that. But I just can't see that being the case straight away. I think Coutinho is obviously a name that is easy to link with them, but it just doesn't feel like that's the kind of player they'd be going for straight away.
Yeah, I'm not even sure that Newcastle's owners will have had a chance to have sat down with any kind of decision maker at a transfer level, if that makes sense. So I don't believe that they've got cast iron shortlist on who they want at this stage. They only coming in Friday, didn't they? Thursday, Friday. So it's going to be easy to band around a load of names and random figures attached to them for the media because of the amount of money that they've suddenly got. But I don't believe that they'll be that far along. And as I said, I don't think Liverpool fans should be too concerned about it. It's going to be interesting to watch. But obviously the human rights aspect of the ownership that we've touched on and other people have spoken about, and they are wholly correct, to be honest. But I suppose from a football perspective, it is going to be quite intriguing to see what level of player and what level of finance is going to go into it.
Are there any Liverpool players you think, Kai, that maybe could be having a look at them? Someone like a Divock Origi, maybe Liverpool have struggled to sort of find a buyer for him. Is this another option for them possibly in that regard?
I mean, it would be that type of player, wouldn't it? The fringe players, the Divock Origi's, Minamino, we saw him on loan at Southampton last year. Possibly even someone like an Oxlade-Chamberlain, if they're serious and they want to, push their way up the table. Oxlade-Chamberlain's got incredible quality. It's just been his injuries, and he struggled to really force his way into the Liverpool team on a consistent basis. So there's certainly players there on the fringes. No doubt Shaqiri would have been that type of player if he was still around. But as Paul was just saying, that there's a long way to go for their recruitment process, and I'm sure that there'll be a lot of names linked over the next few weeks and months leading up to January. But I've got no doubt that they'll go out and make that statement signing. That no doubt they'll get a few in, but there'll certainly be one. I'm sure they're looking to bring in and sell the shirts.
Absolutely. Plenty to think about in terms of Newcastle United's recruitment moving forward. And that ties in quite nicely with Gini Wijnaldum, of course, a former Newcastle United player. There was some comments from him, Gorsty, today where he wasn't maybe particularly happy with how it's gone so far at PSG. What did you make of those comments? Is it too early to be making a judgment on how it's gone, or is this maybe an early sign that things aren't quite going quite as smoothly as he would have wanted?
Yeah, I think so. He played 11 times, but he's only played 500 minutes, I think. Was brought on for the last 15 minutes or so against Man City in the big Champions League game so far, PSG's biggest game of the season to date. And he was a substitute again when they were beaten last week by Rennes. But I suppose this is the risk you run when you move to a club with the squad that Paris Saint-Germain have got. Obviously, it's the most difficult place to get in their team is obviously up front with the embarrassment of riches they've got with Neymar and Messi and Mbappe and Icardi and Di Maria. But in midfield, they're well stocked as well. So maybe Wijnaldum is finding it a little bit tough to show Pochettino that he's capable of getting in there ahead of Marco Verratti or a Idrissa Gueye or even an Ander Herrera. But it's part and parcel of being at a top club, isn't it? He knows that from his 5 years at Liverpool, and he will have been fully aware of that movement to PSG. So if there are some frustrations, then that's what happens. I'm sure he'll knuckle down and try and get into the team, but I don't think Liverpool need to be casting too much of a glance to Paris at that and thinking what could have been, because we've been over this plenty of times. He wanted to stay, Klopp wanted him to stay, and he hasn't. So he's moved on, and I'm sure he'll get his head down and try and get in the PSG team.
I'm sure he'll settle down there eventually. But Kai, I suppose with Curtis Jones having picked up a little bit of an injury this international break with the England under-21s, the question isn't going to go away about have Liverpool adequately replaced Wijnaldum. And of course, there's a couple of other players missing. We don't expect Fabinho will be there at the weekend. There is a bit of a question mark there as well.
Yeah, of course, they never did directly replace him in terms of a one-in, one-out actual transfer signing of a midfielder in the window. But I think we all saw possibly what the plan was at the start of the season with the emergence of Harvey Elliott and just how big of a role Klopp was planning for him to have in this side. Started against Chelsea and I think the Burnley game. So there's a massive show of faith for him, and he'd been one of Liverpool's brightest players the first few games. So a real shame that injury came when it did. And I think if Elliott hadn't have been around, then possibly a direct replacement for Wijnaldum would have come in. But with Gini's situation at PSG, I still think you can argue what else could he have done. As Paul just said, then Klopp wanted him to stay, and whether he said on numerous occasions Wijnaldum that he'll say when the time is right what actually did happen behind the scenes with his contract, and we still don't know what actually did happen there. But it appeared to come down to a straight choice between PSG or Barcelona, and you see the mess Barcelona are in at the moment. You still argue he'd probably better off at PSG, having a kind of rotation role and having a say in a team that's probably going to win the league and no doubt a Champions League run as well. So yeah, Liverpool haven't replaced him possibly as fans would have liked, but the emergence of Elliott and Curtis Jones in recent weeks as well, when they do have everybody fit and firing, they've got more than enough options there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think probably one of the few question marks that I would have this season, Gorsty, is maybe a little bit over the form of Jordan Henderson. Do you think it's a bit premature to say that maybe he's missing Gini Wijnaldum alongside him, or do you think that's something that over the next few weeks will just not be an issue at all?
Yeah, I don't think it's too much of an issue. Fail to see really what results Liverpool would have got had they had Wijnaldum in there instead of a Curtis Jones or a Harvey Elliott. They might have beaten 10-man Chelsea, possibly. It's difficult to say, isn't it? But Liverpool can't really be looking too forlornly across the players who've left because they're in a really healthy state. So, of course, we talk about Wijnaldum because there's still plenty of interest in it, and we see that every day with the stuff that we put out, don't we? People always read it and they're still interested in it. But I think it's probably time to move on from Gini Wijnaldum. He had a brilliant 5 years at Liverpool and will always be remembered for certain moments and what he won, his importance to the team. But there is life after Gini Wijnaldum at Liverpool.
Yes, there certainly is. And I suppose just before we move on from the midfield area entirely, Kai, we'll speak about it more, I'm sure, on Friday's edition of the podcast. But I did mention before that Fabinho is likely to be missing, Alisson the same, because of their international commitments with Brazil. But in terms of that midfield area, given that absence and a couple of different injuries, what's the solution there, do you think? Is there a player to come in, Naby Keita perhaps, or might there be change of formation that's the answer? What's the sort of solution to that, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, you've always got the option of going to the 4-2-3-1, which we saw at times last season, and maybe they did that they switched to it in games with kind of half an hour to go if they were chasing a game. Obviously, that would rely on needing Jota to be fit, because there's been some news today that he may not be available for the weekend, but of course you'll know more on that than I will. But if the front four are all ready and available, then you could do the two midfielders there, and that would probably solve that problem. If not, then you've got the option of Jordan Henderson as the sixth, the holding midfielder, as we've seen him do really well over the last few years when he's had to fill in there. So, even despite the injuries that Liverpool have got and are carrying at the moment, they've still got enough options to get through.
Yeah, still a few days to sort of work out the extent of certain injuries and who will and won't be available. As I say, we'll talk about that on Friday's edition of the podcast when we do preview that Watford game. But for today, we'll finish with a little bit of something different. Obviously, not been loads going on during the international break, Gorsty, but you've been out and about down at Stamford Bridge in London for the StatsBomb conference, and plenty of interesting things to come out of that.
Yeah, it was a really interesting day. Actually, I think it was maybe the third or fourth StatsBomb conference at Stamford Bridge. Obviously, StatsBomb signed a deal with Liverpool in March, didn't he, for Liverpool to use their StatsBomb 360 services and basically just kind of drill down even further into the data analysis, which we know Liverpool are superb at, probably one of the best in Europe as it goes. Michael Edwards was obviously a big proponent of that very early on in his time at Liverpool, and the research departments under him have done plenty of great work that goes under the radar, and that's kind of the way Liverpool have always wanted it. So there's a strict 6-man research team. Quite a few of them were at the event at Stamford Bridge, and the director of research, Ian Graham, was giving a talk on kind of how the best practice of looking into how they recruit. So it was a very interesting day. People like Victor Orta were there, who obviously director of football at Leeds. Vusa Debu there, whose name I've probably butchered there, but she's the head of science, sports science at Ajax. She gave a talk. It was just a day full of really interesting kind of deep dives into the analysis world of football, and it's something that's become a lot more prevalent over the last 4 or 5 years. It was maybe once ridiculed at times, but we've seen it creep into the mainstream lexicon in recent years, haven't we, with expected goals and expected assists. And if that's your bag, it would have been a very interesting day at Stamford Bridge. But it's great just to hear Ian Graham speak on how Liverpool work. It was more of a general theme, really, rather than this is how Liverpool specifically work. But there was a few little details of Liverpool's recruitment department and how they operate. And yeah, as I say, it was a very interesting day.
Yeah, lots of names that people will be familiar with. Michael Edwards, Julian Ward, Ian Graham, as you mentioned, Tim Waskett as well, all people that work behind the scenes at Liverpool. And we don't get to hear from them that often. Obviously, the work has to be secretive to an extent. But what was the kind of purpose of the event? Why is it that these people were coming along and speaking to this conference? It's not something that we see them do too frequently. But what was the kind of reasoning behind that, do you think?
Yeah, well, I think it's a professional kind of conference for the people who were there weren't journalists. I managed to get in there, and was sitting there alongside Josh Williams and David Alexander-Hughes, who obviously do the Analysing Anfield podcast. If you listen to that, it's very much along the same themes as what they speak about on there. Very kind of tactical and detailed and very maths-centric. And yeah, Michael Edwards was there. He was sitting in front of me. He was in row 1, I was in row 2, alongside Julian Ward as assistant, and David Woodfine, who looks after the loans, and Tim Waskett, as you say. So I think it's just generally Liverpool kind of, they have to be seen to be staying on top of the latest trends and developments in this area. And Ian Graham was widely thought of as one of the biggest, one of the best in his field. So it was great to hear him talk. It was plenty of detail on what they look for what they look for in a striker or a midfielder, and how they kind of whittle it down to a short list to then pass on to the sporting director and the scouts to look at in a bit more detail. And it was, as I say, it was just a really interesting forum, and you don't really, as you say, you never hear from these guys, and for obvious reasons, Liverpool are very secretive because they're trying to keep one step ahead of the rivals, aren't they? But it was a really good day at Stamford Bridge on Friday.
I think one of the more interesting bits of that piece that you wrote, Gorsty, and I suppose I'll throw over to Kai on this one, bring him back into the conversation, was that kind of thing that Ian Graham said of, how much it's changed in such a short time. It's only 10 years ago that we were talking about this sort of thing in a very different way to what we do now, Kai. And as Gorsty said, it's very much just part of the way that we report things. You see it on Match of the Day, all of these analytical elements of football. It's very quickly become very normal.
Yeah, it's I think completely accepted now amongst fans and journalists and everybody alike that it's just part of the game, and it's you, as you say, you see it on TV, it's on Sky Match of the Day, it's used in transfers, it's everywhere you go now. It's just there, and it wasn't too long ago that it was maybe mocked by some. I know the Analysing Anfield guys maybe still come across that from time to time, people saying XG and that's a load of rubbish and it doesn't mean anything. But I think if anybody's proven that it does, then it's Liverpool and Michael Edwards, and it's only through their use of these kind of metrics and the data that they've been able to identify people like Mohamed Salah and Diogo Jota, 2 examples that they had a more or less a clear run at. There should have been, looking at the numbers they've produced since they've signed, there should have been a real clamour, and every team should have been trying to sign them, but they just weren't, and they were able to secure them both for 30-40 million, like very, very good fees in this market. And it's through using this data and these kind of analytics that they've been able to do that.
And it's not just transfers either, is it, Gorsty? Obviously, that's a big part of it, but there's other elements that this sort of analytical approach comes into it as well. Was that a big part of the conference as well, or was it more down the sort of transfer side of things?
No, to be honest, I mean, Ian Graham explained how it's used in the medical departments and wherever else, but he did say that recruitment is where you get your biggest bang for your buck, essentially. And it was fascinating just to hear how Liverpool kind of look at traits that are perhaps undervalued by other clubs. If a striker scores 30 goals a season and he's given 15 assists, then he's obviously going to be very highly valued, and that is just obvious. But Liverpool looking at things that perhaps other teams aren't looking at, and I think Diogo Jota might be a good example of that, to be honest. Someone who was a bit of a left field purchase almost, wasn't it? Don't think too many people would have expected him to fit the bill at Liverpool, but they're looking at pressing stats, the distance covered stats, the amount runs per game, and just the certain elements that aren't always that don't always make players massively valuable to the general transfer market. So I think that was a key point. Also looking at kind of put in like a slideshow of searching for a midfielder, for example, and we're looking at 2 metrics: pressure regains and expected assists. And there was a certain amount of players who were great at one thing, not so good at another, and then you added in another metric, and they were looking at certain players who were, as I say, good at this, not great at that, really good at the other thing. But essentially what it came down to is clubs like Liverpool have to make big compromises at certain points because they don't have the transfer outlay that the likes of a City or a Chelsea or a Manchester United do, so they can't kind of wave over it all and just think they're going to be able to get the best players because they got the most money. It's almost about deciding what is valuable to your team, what is valuable to how you play, and that was very much the theme that I came away with once listening to Ian Graham's presentation. So I'd say what was quite a fascinating day, and it was even more interesting just seeing Liverpool's research team and sporting director there, on not kind of giving their own wisdom or anything like that, just listening and learning and looking to stay one step ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really interesting stuff. I'm sure it was a brilliant day for you. And if you've obviously not read the first piece that Gorsty wrote from that conference, that was out at lunchtime on Monday. I'd recommend reading that one. I think by the time people are listening to this podcast as a podcast, it will be out, the second piece from that conference as well. So really interesting stuff. Make sure you don't miss either of those. But for now, we'll be back on Friday with the next Blood Red podcast to talk ahead of Liverpool against Watford. For now, it's goodbye for now.